Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe announced last Friday that he is resigning due to health reasons, but he says he plans to stay on until a successor is named. Japan's Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga has tossed his hat into the ring. Suga is seen as a close aide of the now longest-serving Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Other contenders are former Foreign Minister Fumio Kishida and the former Defense Minister Shigeru Ishiba. Abe's resignation comes as Japan faces many challenges, such as the coronavirus pandemic, a stagnant economy, and the postponed 2020 Tokyo Olympics. So, what's the impact of his resignation? What are some of the policy that's likely to be continued by the next Prime Minister? Let's talk to our panelists from Japan and China. For more on the resignation of Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, we are joined by a very strong panel in Tokyo. Naoki Yoshino, who is a professor emeritus with Keio University. He himself is an economist. In Hong Kong, we have Kato Yoshikatsu, adjunct associate professor with Asia Global Institute at University of Hong Kong. In Beijing, via Skype, Jia Daojun, professor from the School of International Studies at Peking University. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. The biggest news, of course, over the weekend, this is resignation of Japanese Prime Minister. But as far as we know, Mr. Kato, this is not the first time.
We have known, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has had medical issues over more than decades. But maybe, he accumulated his fatigue because, facing the coronavirus or, postpone the Tokyo Olympics. So maybe, he's been very tired and, he finally made the decision to resign. This is something surprising, but not beyond our expectation.
We haven't known yet who is likely to be the most strong candidates, do we? Mr. Yoshino. Likely September the 14th, the LDP is going to make a decision.
Yes, we have not known who will be the successor. However, Abenomics has lots of issues to be remained. Prime Minister Abe was successful in monetary policy and monetary easing. However, fiscal consolidation and structural reforms are still remain. So the successor of Prime Minister Abe has to do lots of reforms in economic policies.
Professor Jia, on Monday, the Japanese Prime Minister was reportedly already on the phone with the U.S. President Donald Trump. How do you see from Beijing the latest development?
Well, Mr. Abe is one of the few Northeast Asian leaders who has fairly extensive business background. He speaks English, and Japan and the U.S. being strategic allies, it's not a surprise that they make a phone call. And normally when such changes of leadership happen, it's probably a courtesy call, but we are at the mercy of press release by both the Japanese and American governments. We'll have to wait and see what specific contents they discussed.
Now we know that the pandemic situation in Japan is coming in cycles, and we are now in the very middle of another cycle, which is quite serious. So what about the economic prospect and the possibility of continuation of Abenomics in that regard?
Let me talk from my expertise. I think one is Tokyo Olympics, because Shinzo Abe very regrettably postponed the Tokyo Olympics, the second time post Tokyo Olympics, and actually that would create some damage for the Japanese economy, not only substantially, but to stimulate and pushing forward the Japanese mentality to integrate the potentiality of Japanese economy. This is one thing. And in terms of Japan-China relations or external relationship, because Shinzo Abe, as a part of Abenomics, he made a point of inbound, tourism from outside. And in this sense, the pandemic basically cut down this demands, this internal consumption. So I think multilateral factors combine together and give a damage to Japan's economy.
Spending especially government spending, Professor Jia, has been the key message coming from the Abenomics. But now, how much the government can still spend? I mean, how much can you make the yen cheap and flow around for investment? And how much will the outside so-called inbound tourism and the exports really help Japan? As a result of the pandemic, these do not know. What do you make of the current situation, though?
Abenomics, especially the largeness of stimulus packages, or should we say unlimited quantitative easing, it's not necessarily unique to Japan. A bigger threat, I wouldn't even call it a worry, I think it's a threat, would come probably from the United States in response to the pandemic. The Federal Reserve announced unlimited easing, and then you have persistent free handouts to consumers. And how this is going to work remains to be seen. Then coming back to the Japanese situation, I would think aging and the difficulty of creating new jobs that fit an aging population. On top of that, you have robotics taking over a lot of jobs, and it's a very difficult, structurally difficult situation for Japan. And that's probably why our earlier commentator emphasized the Olympics as a way of boosting confidence of the Japanese population, and also Olympics as a way of relinking many of the activities between Japan and the rest of the world in terms of trade and investment.
Yeah, of course the Olympic Games, according to the latest news, is still going to continue next year, but if it could be done, would that be a huge boost to the Japanese economy, even given the current situation? If it could not, what would that mean? Will the next Prime Minister's job mainly to maintain that the Olympic Games will be held? Professor Yoshino.
I think Olympic Games could be opened. However, number of visitors will be drastically reduced.
Right.
So I don't think economic impact will be big. However, it is important for Japan to have Olympic Games. So I think it's the announcement effect, not the economic impact. Secondly, I think robotics and other IT technology will help elderly people to keep on working rather than conflicting each other. Because elderly people, their muscles will be weaker, then robot will be needed. So I think IT technology and robot will compensate for those elderly workers. They can come back to our economy. That is a very good positive sign. Thirdly, I think Japan needs infrastructure to develop information-oriented industries, including government offices. And that could be very important key issues, how we could incorporate those technological progress, especially IT technologies in the jobs.
Will this pandemic, in a way, silver lining out of this cloud, in a way help with the digitization that is going on inside Japan, which has been long time desired, but the pace could be slow earlier?
Yes, as you said, it was very slow. However, all my classes were internet, and I have never seen students for one semester, and schools and so on. Then the top teacher can teach the best lecture to all over Japan.
That's right.
So that will drastically change the level of the education. I think we have to take pinch's chance. So Japan should promote lots more IT technologies in education, and also people started to work from home rather than commuting. And it is very good for ladies. They can take care of their children at home, and still they can work. So I think it's a very good sign for Japan to recover our slow progress of information technologies.
Japanese society, always tends to be conservative and reluctant to change. But now we are facing a pandemic and plus postponed of Tokyo Olympics, and now I think we should take this crisis into chances to transform our society drastically, and remoting or work from home, or digitalization, information technology, and we have to face it, and we have to transform ourselves to the next generation. So I think it's we should think the current situation strategically.
Professor Jia, how should we understand the legacy, if we can, even though premature at this moment to say that, about Prime Minister Abe, particularly regarding foreign policy?
Well, Mr. Abe served as, the longest serving Japanese Prime Minister post-war. He presided over a world that was changing, but nevertheless, the driver of the change was probably not so much from Japan, but from the two other ends of the Pacific, namely China and the United States. He, representative of politicians his generation, he's really in many ways the epitome of a generation of leadership in Japan in this regard. We're really coming to an end of a transition of resetting in some ways, resetting on the foundations of relationship between the two countries. In other words, the histories of war are effectively being put aside. Then we basically, between China and Japan, has a trade and investment based relationship rather than in security cooperation. The two countries managed to keep the territorial issue, namely over what we call here in China Diaoyu and what they call in Japan Senkaku Island in check. And on that basis, it's really takes great effort down the road, whoever becomes the new Prime Minister, to identify a set of foundations for the two countries to move forward. Earlier, the two Japanese colleagues commented on IT. One of the challenges, as I see it, as a political scientist, is that in many ways, particularly under Prime Minister Abe, the Japanese government has been maintaining a steady distancing from China in IT technologies. IT is a new industry, but it's a growth industry, but it's very heavily consumer-oriented. It does not necessarily require high income or anything else. But of course, politics can come in, as we have seen, in the ban on apps in different societies. So overall, the relationship will be complicated, but from both sides, both here in China and over there in Japan, we need a lot more effort to re-identify a set of new foundations.
Mr. Kato, following what Professor Jia just said, how did you see Prime Minister Abe being zigzagging his marks and also Japan's role so far in a ever more complicated geopolitics between China and the United States? Where do you think he apparently tries to lead Japan to?
I think in terms of external relations or Japanese foreign policy, actually Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has contributed a lot and put a great investment on foreign policy. First of all, Japan continues to strengthen the relation with the United States. Japan-U.S. alliance has experienced somehow turbulence. Maybe it's partly thanks to the President Trump, including the TPP. The United States unilaterally withdrew from the TPP. It's a very important diplomatic multilateral effort, but the United States withdrew unilaterally. But Shinzo Abe continues to make it activated, and and as a CPTPP, trying to initiate the open and free and relatively inclusive, high qualities multilateralism in this region. So I think this is a great accomplishment for Shinzo Abe. And at the same time, Shinzo Abe has tried to manage the relation with China as much as he can. So this is a very complicated triangle, Japan, US, and China. And this has been the very important challenge for Japanese foreign policy, how to take balance and manage well among this triangle relationship. But Shinzo Abe basically and successfully managed the relation with the United States and with China. Maybe when it comes to China, basically, promoting the economic ties and some, strengthen the international cooperation, including RCEP or, joint efforts in the third countries. Of course, this is just the beginning. But I think this is a great legacy and lesson for us to take for Japan, how to simultaneously manage this very complicated and strategic triangle. I mean, Japan, China, and the United States. And in this sense, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has done something meaningful.
One is the biggest market Japan could have in its neighborhood, of course, China, including high-tech products to China, which, of course, started from the very beginning of China's reform and opening up the trade between China and Japan. But now, if doing that, there might be some problems with Washington. However, if only kowtowing to Washington's prescription of the world map, Japan would also lose a lot. How to maintain that is a very interesting factor, particularly in the tech sector. Mr. Kato.
In terms of technology or high tech, because now it's always combined with the national security issue. So some check and balance or observation should be required. But for Japan, not only diplomatically but economically, Japan has no way to lose China's potential huge market. But at the same time, we need to learn how to manage and how to adjust to the new trend, including what you said, the rise of technology, the rise of high technology. And now huge and deep skepticism are here, existing in front of us. So how to tackle and how to overcome this kind of vicious cycle and mutual distrust. And in this sense, Japanese leaders, including Prime Minister's successor, we need to continuously pursue how to deal with China. At the same time, we cannot lose the Japan-U.S. alliance. So this is the biggest dilemma for Japanese diplomacy.
Yeah, Mr. Yoshino, as an economist, the political and geopolitical complex Japan is facing, just like many others are facing today.
Asia's GDP, 1600, was 2/3 of the world. And then after first Industrial Revolution and so on, Asia's share had been diminished. But there's expectation again, 2/3 of GDP may be created by Asian nations. So Northeast Asia, South Asia, those connectivities are very important. And secondly, we often talk about political relations, but we need three continuous relations: political relation, industrial relation, and people-to-people relations. And I think industrial relations, as you mentioned, not only high-tech, but also various parts of industrial connections will be needed within Asia. So that is very important. Thirdly, I think people with people. When we looked at France and Germany, they had lots of fighting each other. But I heard high school students started to exchange each other. Some of the students go to Germany. German students went to France. And then gradually, the people by people, their mind became closer and closer. So I think China, Korea, Japan, I think those kind of student exchange, especially using internet, then they don't have to go to each country, but they can start talking each other. Japanese say ni hao, then Chinese say hello, and we can start communicating each other. So I think three levels of connectivities are very important.
What is likely to be the quality of the next Prime Minister of Japan? What he or she must have in terms of its quality? And who is that likely to be? A brief prediction, if you can?
I have great confidence in whoever comes in. In many ways, the political structure of Japan that was shaped in the 1950s remains strong. The person who is going to lead the LDP and the Japanese government is not going to be as critical. But the challenges like aging, like fiscal consolidation, like regenerating growth, these are the same. It will be with Japan for many more years. And the biggest challenge is probably aging.
I think he has to have 3 points. One is domestic economy. fiscal policy, huge deficits, and monetary policy has to be gradually consolidated. So he has to know economics very well. And secondly, he has to friendly with US and Asia, and he can be the connector between various regions. So politically, he has to be respected, and he has to travel many, many countries to negotiate each other. And third one is technological progress. Japan is doing very well. So I think lots of connections can be combined with other nations.
The next Prime Minister should be strongly committed to political stability and policy continuity. And in this sense, the next Prime Minister should be, how to say, very deeply understanding what Shinzo Abe could have done and could not have done.
Well said. Naoki Yoshino, Yoshikatsu Kato, and Jia Daojun. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us, and be safe wherever you are.